Welcome to a special edition of School Talk. I'm John Wensky, Vice Chair of Shrewsbury School Committee. On today's program, we will have a roundtable discussion to look at the next school year's budget recommendation from Dr. Sawyer. And to do that, I've brought along a few friends with me today. So I'd like to introduce Chair Sandy Fritz and our Secretary, Dr. Dale McGee. Welcome. So just to recap, the FY21 budget that we're currently in right now, we had to reduce our budget by $1.9 million coming into this school year. Approximately 30 positions were eliminated coming into the school year. As we look ahead to the next school year, we have a $4.9 million budget gap, and that's based on Dr. Sawyer's recommendation that was made on February 10th, and just the day prior to that, Town Manager Kevin Mizakar's recommendation for the budget increase for the schools. So that's where the gap was defined, and that translates to about 48.7 positions that would need to be reduced if that gap is not mitigated. In addition, that gap also includes the opening of the new Beale Elementary School. And Sandy, I want to start with you in terms of the concerns around opening the new Beale Elementary School as planned and as promised in August.
Right. And I think historically we want to talk about what happened with Beale. The town overwhelmingly approved the new Beale School, and that was back in November of 18 to alleviate overcrowding as well as provide equitable educational spaces for all students. And one of the big things we wanted was full-day free kindergarten for all students. And this means what will happen when the new Beale School opens, we will draw down student population across the other 4 elementary schools. We will open this 5th elementary school. And the new Beale School is a 790 student elementary school. It's a very large elementary school, and that means we will need to add an additional 32.6 staff to the school. So as you mentioned, John, the $1.7 million is needed to hire new staff, because we're not only needing teachers, we're needing nurse, other educational staff will be, because it's such a large school. So again, it's a capital project. So we are receiving funding from the town as well as from the Massachusetts School Building Authority to open the school. But there's a construction component to the school, but there's also a staffing component. Construction separate from staffing. So the operational budget will take care of the staffing, and that is where that gap exists. And we are worried that we will not be able to open the school without that additional 1.7 to be added to the school budget.
Right, yeah, and certainly, we talk about free full-day kindergarten. We're one of few districts in the state that don't offer that to its residents. And, certainly for people watching, this could be the first time that they may have heard about the budget challenges, but there have been a lot of meetings happening behind the scenes, certainly between school committee representatives and Board of Selectmen. Want to give us a little bit more context on those meetings?
Sure. Back in February of last year, and Mr. Samia, who was a former school committee member, is now a Board of Selectmen, he started what we're calling 2-2 meetings. 2 school committee members, 2 Board of Selectmen, along with Town Manager Kevin Mizikar, Dr. Sawyer, and Mr. Collins. We have been meeting every other week, and now we're meeting on a weekly basis. And starting last February, we wanted to talk about the budget. What are the budget issues? What are the budget concerns? And as we know, COVID did come quickly on the heels of us starting those meetings. So we did have a $1.9 million budget deficit last year, reduction, I should say, as well as almost 30 FTEs. COVID pandemic certainly added to our budget concerns. And then we moved into this year's budget concerns. So what we've been doing is really meeting with the municipal side of the government to look at where we're going, what do we need to do to solve not only the current year's issue, but also looking at what we've talked about for many years as a school committee, the long-term structural deficit issues. And we've been working to move forward and try to get some long-term planning going. And that these behind-the-scenes meetings have been extremely helpful. And I think looking at the budget this year, the municipal side had a good understanding of what we were dealing with from the school department perspective.
certainly the budget ask, I think, is pretty simple the way Dr. Sawyer laid it out on February 10th. I mean, we're looking to basically, carry over our current staffing levels and programs, and that doesn't include bringing back the 30 that we had to cut in coming into this year, but most importantly, opening the new Beal. And as you mentioned too, with the structural deficit challenges, it's not really breaking news in the town. Certainly, we know there have been a lot of fiscal studies that have been done over the years, and I want to shift over to Dr. McGee to kind of speak to that piece. Dr. McGee, give us a little bit of a history around not only the structural deficit in town, but also just the override history.
So I think the term structural deficit is a little abstract for a lot of people. They can't really translate it down into something very concrete, but the simplest way to translate it is that by design, the rate at which our taxes are going up is not as fast as the rate at which our expenses are going up. And so designed into the system is the necessity to go to the taxpayers and get their approval, have them review the budget, have them review the ask, get their approval to increase the taxes. This was born of a taxpayer revolt that occurred in the late 70s and early 80s, and was at a time when we were experiencing high inflation. Inflation was 5, 10, 15%, high unemployment, which is a very toxic combination, and the taxes in Massachusetts were considerably above average, particularly the local. That is where the term Taxachusetts came up, was born at that time. So this group got together and passed this Proposition 2.5, which basically took large increases in taxes out of the hands of the local representatives and put them back into the hands of the taxpayers. That was the idea. It was not that anybody realistically thought that you could run a government with a 2.5% increase every year. This isn't true today, and it was definitely not true in the early 1980s, where inflation alone was in the 5 to 10% range. So periodically, people have to go back and approve an override. Now, there are certain instances in which towns can get by for a pretty long time without needing an override, and Shrewsbury was able to get by for a long time without an override. A combination of things was happening. The school population was not increasing very much. The total population was increasing quite a bit more. And if you have a lot of new homes being built, new businesses moving into a community, which is what has happened in Shrewsbury, then your revenues go up by more than 2.5%. because you're getting the additional revenue of the new people in the community. So with that, we were able to get by a long time. Other communities were not so lucky. And if we were to look at other communities in the state since 1982, there have been over 4,400 overrides that have been submitted to the voters, and about 40% of them have passed. So it's a common occurrence in most communities. The typical community has had about 8 or 9 overrides in that span of time. For us, it's kind of a new thing, and that is part of our issue here and why we're having this conversation. But another thing has happened as well over the past few decades, and that is that aid from the state to the schools, dedicated aid that comes to our communities, has made a big difference in our ability to finance our schools, but it is related to the wealth of the community. And through various recalculations and the like, what the state has found is that for the first decade or so of this program, they felt that they were overpaying Shrewsbury. They were giving us more than the formula would have dictated. And so going forward, they've virtually frozen the amount of money that they are sending us over the past 10 years or so. So that the stresses on the system, both from Proposition 2.5, as well as the fact that state aid is going up virtually nothing, it is way under 1%, means that the pressure on local taxes is increasing. And what we see is a realistic projection into the future of how fast our expenses are going to go up and how fast our revenues are going to go up. And slide 3 shows that. And basically, although you can't see the details of the slide, the important thing is you see those red bars at the bottom getting bigger and bigger. And that relates to the deficit that we know is going to happen, that we can predict in advance. And what we need to do as responsible leaders of this community is understand that that need is coming and meet it before the problems arise. In the past, what we have experienced is that when the town has not been able to meet our requests for revenue, programs have been cut. And so again, if you look at slide number 4, what does that mean? Well, it means that we eliminated foreign language in elementary schools. It means that we eliminated a Jobs for Bay State Grads program, a vocational program. We eliminated auto shop. The late bus for people taking activities, gone. And there are a number of other things, delaying buying textbooks. There was a time, some time ago, where we had textbooks that had countries in them that didn't exist anymore. And we've instituted fees, again, trying to patch the holes. So all of these things have been layered on, adding to the pain, and now we're at the point where, having drawn as many fees up as we can and running them among the highest in the state, and having cut back on as many programs as we are, we're whittling away at the number of teachers and other educators that our students have, and affecting the class size at a time when such a move could not be more poorly timed.
Definitely, yeah, and certainly as those services are cut, they very rarely come back, right?
Exactly.
Because the needs are new for the following year, right? So, and certainly we want to get to a point where we can maintain or improve on the educational services we're providing to the town, as opposed to kind of looking at what needs to get cut next. I think that's a really important point to make. So we've had certainly some productive meetings, televised meetings with the Board of Selectmen, talking about the potential for an override. Certainly not something that we take lightly, but in the midst of a nearly $5 million budget gap, that can be a challenge. And one of the things that's been talked about quite a bit over the last couple meetings that we've had with them is what's referred to oftentimes as the Arlington Model, right? Kind of this override statement or commitment to the town residents, which really serves a few purposes. And most importantly, kind of looking to the future, looking 4 years down the road, and taking a look at our operating budget, not just for the schools,
Right.
but also for municipal services. I think that's an important point to make as well. We're talking about all municipal services, and this has the opportunity to be groundbreaking for the town. Sandy, you want to?
Absolutely.
well,
And I think we have to always mention that Shrewsbury is a well-managed community, fiscally responsible, and we make sure that every penny is accounted for. But it's difficult when the expenses outpaced revenue. So when Mr. Mizikar presented or discussed this Arlington model, as last year, it's the first time I had heard of the town of Arlington using this override stabilization fund. And what you just talked about is maintaining and improving is something that we have not been able to do. We've been status quo, which we know is really a cut budget because there's cost drivers and inflation. So if we look at their model, they're able to commit to the community a set number of years for a set dollar amount, and then municipal and school services agree to a set percentage of operating budget costs so that they do not go back to the community for that period of time, and they commit to that dollar amount. It's stable, it's predictable, and we're able to move ahead. And when I'm looking at it from an economic and a financial picture, I think we're going to be able to solve this deficit that we have now. And one of my main concerns is opening that new Beal School. We have an agreement with the MSBA to open the school upon completion of construction. They're providing a large amount of financing to us to open that school. So at this point, we can solve the budget gap, but we can also finally begin to work on the structural deficit and that long-term planning, which we have not been able to do for many, many, many years. It's a win-win, and I think, Mr. Mizikar is bringing us an opportunity that, yes, overrides are difficult to pass, and it's hard for some families to be able to to pay more in taxes, but it's an opportunity that I think is too good to pass up, and it's a long-term solution for us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot to like about the Arlington model. It essentially requires the town departments to project budgets 5 years into the future and really think forward a great deal. It recognizes the fact that our revenues are limited and that periodically an override is necessary. And so it recognizes that fact, and it takes a pot of money and it allows that pot of money and its depletion over several years to be the meter we use to see when a new override is there. So we don't get to the point that was seen on that slide I showed earlier, where all these services get cut, all these teachers get cut. So much pain is felt by the community before an override occurs. We've got a meter to use that tells us when it's going to happen, and we can intervene before the problem occurs, which is responsible governance.
Exactly. I mean, there's some level of future financial planning happening, a level of predictability, and something that we could work on maintaining or improving the services we provide, not only in the schools, but certainly across all municipal services, which is great.
John, if I could just mention as well, I think something that had never happened before in any of our time of serving on the board, or just for my time living in this community, was the commitment that we voted with the Board of Selectmen, our commitment to each other as boards, as well as a commitment to the community for this override process, which was something we had never done before. And I think that shows our commitment not only to the taxpayers but to each other to work together going forward financially, that this is a four corners, we're going to stay within this, and it sets that tone moving forward. And I think it's a very workable solution for this problem.
Absolutely. And as we saw on March 16th, both boards voted unanimously for the framework
Yes.
around this model, which
Yep.
is great news. I want to kind of pivot next to talking about federal stimulus dollars. We talk a lot about that, especially over the last year with COVID relief money that have helped support certainly opening the schools and getting us to a point where we can safely return back to school. We know there's been an additional bill that's been passed, and certainly the town is expecting money from that relief bill. But it's important to differentiate, what this relief money is intended for, kind of what it is and what it's not. Certainly, it's not a solution to our structural deficit problems, and we also know too that this is for one-time restricted use. If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And I think, at this point, we don't have a lot of guidance yet on what this new, and it's the, make sure I can read it, American Rescue Plan, which is the new federal stimulus, and the amount that is being talked about is slightly over $11 million, but we don't have that specifically yet. I know Mr. Mizikar and the Board of Selectmen discussed it last night. Again, it's not official. It will be in 4 buckets. The number 1 is pandemic and COVID direct costs, premium pay to essential workers, revenue replacement, and then water, sewer, and broadband projects. Again, it's not a solution to the town's long-term financial challenges. It does not solve the structural deficit problems, and it's intended to reinvigorate the economy as it recovers from the pandemic. So it's one-time use and not for recurring expenses, which I think is the big thing that the public needs to understand. It's not going to get us out of the structural deficit issue.
Right, and I think that the important thing here is that we have a crisis right now with our schools, big time, and we need to take care of our students, we need to take care of our system. And we don't know, this is still a bit of a mystery as to how much of this money can actually be applied to ordinary operating expenses. Like you say, it's a one-time shot in the arm at most. And should those kind of revenues come in, if we were to move forward as planned with the Arlington model and the associated override with it, that could just stave off the next override for a year or two, as opposed to, hoping that somehow this is going to change the way the world works. So I think the money's coming in. Maybe it'll help, maybe it won't. But I think that our responsibility in running the district and in managing the community is such that the responsible thing to do is to take care of the finances of the town in a more long-lasting way.
Absolutely, and I know Mr. Mizikar stated last night, it will come in two pieces, 50% this year and 50% next year. And the whole timing of it is unknown, the restrictions, the guidelines, and we have a lot of things riding on this. First of all, opening Beale, and there's a lot that needs to be done to open that school in a timely fashion and hiring, and we have asked the Board of Selectmen to put the override question on the May ballot in order to give the school department that organizational time that it needs to get everything that it needs done and give us time to plan that is for families to plan as well.
Right. This has been an extraordinary year. I don't think anybody needs to be told that. But, in an ordinary year, these sort of budget problems would be an extremely heavy lift for any district. And this district has functioned extremely well in modeling, remodeling, and remodeling again, how they can try to run the school system and keep the doors open. But then we also are still winding down for the COVID epidemic. We don't know what school's going to exactly look like in September. And depending on the spacing requirements, depending on whether there's any resurgence or anything, the stress on the system is going to increase under those circumstances. The planning that we've done so far is under optimistic, the COVID is going to be under control. But we need to understand that this is not a time to gamble. This is not a time to say maybe things will turn out well on their own, because we've been through a year where that hasn't been the case at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think Dale raises a good point, because we talked about the COVID costs, about an annual cost was almost close to $500,000 use with buildings and PPE and everything else. So not knowing how school will reopen, and we hope it's a lot different than this year, but we could have still ongoing COVID costs out of that pandemic dollars that we're getting that could still be,
Yeah.
$500,000 going forward.
Right.
So there's so many unknowns with what's coming to us.
Even looking ahead to the planned, reopening in full of K through 4 and then middle school levels, certainly there are many expenses lined up in terms of, keeping space between students in the classroom, moving them back, hiring moving companies and,
Ordering desks.
Exactly, yeah.
Lots of things that we had to do.
It's just a lot of unknown expenses that we need to plan for, and, that relief money is what that one-time use is for.
Right.
So, as we look ahead, certainly in the status as of this broadcast, the Board of Selectmen are, working through discussions on, potentially putting a operational override question on the May ballot, on the town ballot.
Right.
So those discussions are ongoing. Certainly we've been, communicating with the PTOs across all the various schools. And we continue to have those 2-2 meetings as well. So there's active dialogue happening across the town, across the schools, and then of course coming up in April we'll have our Finance Committee hearing.
That's right, April 10th.
Yeah, April 10th. So we've already had, certainly one meeting with the Finance Committee to make them aware of what these challenges. So we'll have our standard, annual meeting with them to talk about the budget and the reduction plan that accompanies that, as Dr. Sawyer went through on February 24th. And then that leads to town meeting on May 22nd, where the budget will be voted on. So, certainly we're actively communicating with all of our residents to keep them informed, whether that's through our meetings, here at Town Hall and beyond. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think for me, this is the year we have not stopped our meetings.
Yeah,
It's
true.
been, we've never had as many meetings in all my years on the committee. It's been continuous. I hope we're providing information to the community, and we've been actively pushing for an override since January. And we just feel there's really no other option available, that there just is not that revenue stream coming into the community. I personally think that the situation is as bad or maybe worse than the 2014, because we are going to go straight to class sizes as bad or worse than they were in 2014 because of the number of staff that would have to be laid off or let go immediately. And it's not a scare tactic. I mean, that's not what we're trying to do. It's just the reality after what we had happen last year and now the size of this gap.
Right, and you look at the 30 positions that we had to cut coming into this year, another potential for, close to 50, with this gap in addition to the 32 that need to staff Beal, right? And then, what happens after that. So it is, an educational crisis in Shrewsbury, as Dr. Sawyer has mentioned in his meetings, and
Right.
definitely want to, get some urgency around this. So
Absolutely. And we have been partnering with the Board of Selectmen and Mr. Mizikar. I know he is providing every dollar our way that he can to the schools. It's just that the revenue stream is not there. It's just not available.
Absolutely. So with that, we'll end our broadcast. I'd like to thank everybody for watching. Definitely stay informed, stay engaged, continue watching the school committee meetings, and thank you again for watching.